What if Bela discovered magic at Hogwarts? I was walking towards the island in the middle of the Cullen's ridiculously large kitchen with my salad in hand when it happened. With everything that had kicked off in the last year, including the danger brought about by James and his revenge-seeking mate, the departure and return of my adopted vampire family, and the realization that I was living only miles from a tribe of shapeshifters, this was the last thing I had been expecting. A loud crash echoed through the room as the plate hit the floor, the food spilling across the surface whilst the fractured pieces of china clinked against one another on the polished wood. I stood frozen, fully aware that 4 pairs of ochre eyes were focused completely on me. Finally, when it became obvious that I was not presently able to move, I was addressed by a deep, musical voice to my right. "Bela?" he asked cautiously. I gave no response. 2 rock-hard, muscular arms snaked around my torso, pulling me until my back was pressed against a cold, stony chest. I could feel icy breath tickling my ear as he attempted to rouse me from my paralysis. "Bela, what's wrong? Are you all right?" Edward rotated my body and tilted my head up to better see my eyes. Other than my drumming heart, they were the best indicators of my emotional state. They must have revealed some evidence of the raging fear which had suddenly gripped me, for the crease between his eyes deepened and his own eyes hardened. Maybe it was more to do with the fact that Jasper was stood only 5 feet away and he had undoubtedly picked up on my swift mood change. "Why are you so terrified, Bela?" asked Jasper as he stepped around his concerned-looking wife to move closer to me. Emmett stood silently with his back against the fridge, always the picture of ease, regardless of circumstances. Edward stroked my face with his right hand, his left placed securely on the small of my back. When his hand moved down to grip mine, he gasped as his finger brushed the bracelet circling my wrist. My eyes flitted to it, as did Edward's. The band was made of black leather, both ends connecting to a peculiar centerpiece. It was a large gold coin. Anyone observing it would probably just assume it be a souvenir of some kind, for it certainly did not resemble anything from the accepted forms of currency existing throughout the world. On the side that was visible, there was a picture of something bearing a resemblance to that of a dragon, and the words Unum Galleon were embossed around the rim. "Bela," Edward said calmly, though there was a definite undercurrent of some strong emotion, which he was evidently attempting to conceal, "would you please explain to me why your bracelet has suddenly started burning?" I averted my eyes from the galleon as I began unfastening the leather strap, instead turning my gaze on Alice, who had just been joined by the 3 remaining Cullens, each wearing a slightly puzzled expression. Alice's eyes turned glassy and her face lost its stiffness, only to be replaced with what was clearly frustration. "I don't understand," she declared, her eyes meeting Edward's for a second before settling back on me. "It doesn't make sense. What's going on, Bela?" I ignored her, turning the bracelet over once it had come loose in order to see the underside. There, on the rim of the coin, where the word Gringotts should have been clearly marked, was written Harry at Hogwarts. Fight. Apparate Hog's head. I had hoped that whatever Alice had seen had not been related to anything to do with Hogwarts, but I had been fairly certain that the likelihood of that was slim. This, naturally, confirmed it. She'd seen me at my old school. What else could it have been? The vision hadn't even waited for me to consciously decide to return, for I had resolved long ago that should revolution occur in the wizarding world, I would be there to help my friends. What kind of Gryffindor would I be, after all, if I turned chicken at the most crucial moment? "I have to go," I whispered, afraid to meet the eyes of my fiancé, despite knowing full well that I had to. When I looked up, I was relieved to see that he was staring off in the opposite direction. Then, of course, I realized that his eyes were directed at Alice. They were communicating silently, their expressions stern, and any imminent departure on my part suddenly seemed unlikely. "Until you explain exactly what the hell is going on, Bela, you're going nowhere." Edward shifted his stunningly penetrating gaze to me. "Damn, nothing Alice sees right now is comprehensible. She sees you running around someplace, pointing a stick and throwing light everywhere. If I didn't know you so well, I would have guessed that you were off to play some unusual game of Laser Quest." "Edward," I said, pleadingly, "I am sorry but I really can't explain right now. I have to go, and you have to let me." "Not until you explain." The rest of the Cullens looked on expectantly. I gave a heavy sigh. I'd always known I would have to tell them someday, and I had fully intended to, but I'd been waiting for the right moment. When I'd first met Edward, I had been trying to get him to reveal his own secret. I'd had my suspicions as soon as I'd laid eyes on him. I'd learnt all about vampires in my defense against the dark arts lessons, and the only thing that had thrown me off, in truth, was the uncharacteristic coloring of his eyes, which should have been, according to my studies, bright red, but I could hardly just come out with, "Hey, Edward. You're a vampire, right? What's up with that eye color of yours?" I am only asking because I was told by my third-year defense teacher, Remus Lupin, who coincidentally happens to be a werewolf, that they're supposed to be the same color as your food. That would have gone down really well, I am sure. Obviously, I couldn't bring up the fact that I knew he was a vampire without exposing myself in some way. Instead, I had waited to broach the subject until my theory had been confirmed by Jacob Black. I hadn't known that he would give me the excuse I needed beforehand, but once he did, I didn't waste any time. As we progressed in our relationship, I knew that I would be able to trust him with my own secret, but until the same could be said for his family, I wasn't about to reveal anything of my history. Then, when James came into the picture, any honesty on my part had to be put on hold. I had been working my way up to telling Edward the truth after the threat had been destroyed, only he left before I could come clean. And then, once I became aware of Arrow and his abilities, I had settled on maintaining my secret until after my transformation and our next meeting with the Volturi. Yes, there were some vampires who happened to be aware of the existence of my world, the wizarding world, but the majority remained ignorant, and I was not prepared to be the one to change that. Maybe Arrow was already in on it, maybe he wasn't. Either way, I wasn't about to take that risk, and I certainly was not going to give him further reason to want me for his freaky, little club. I inhaled deeply and closed my eyes, so that I could say what had to be said without the tempting distraction of Edward's face. Fine, I'll tell you, but none of it is going to make much sense because we have very little time, and even if it does, you're still going to think I am crazy. I peeked at him through the slits my eyelids formed. He stood as still as a statue, waiting, as did his baffled family. I reclosed my eyes and clenched my fist, before launching into what I am sure was a very convoluted explanation. I have to go back to school, not Forks. The one I was at before I moved back to the States because there's. Wait, what? Emmett interrupted. You lived in Phoenix before you moved here. My mother did, but I was away at a school in the UK. I'd tell you whereabouts, but I am not entirely sure. Edward moved to speak, but I placed a finger to his lips. Let me finish. I know this sounds ridiculous, but you wanted the truth and I don't have much time. He nodded his head in response and the crease returned to the space between his eyes. You know how my mom is a little strange. Well, after I'd just turned 10, she got it into her head that she wanted to emigrate. We moved to a place called Dorset. I liked it there, it was kinda nice. Obviously, my mom's fascination didn't last English weather isn't exactly amazing, and I could tell she was leaning towards moving back to Phoenix, but before she settled on it, we received a visit from a woman named Minerva McGonagall. At first, we thought she was kind of loopy, because she began insisting that I had magical powers and that I was a witch. Then I started thinking back on all the unexplainable things that happened when I was younger. At the elementary school I attended, for instance, there was a girl who used to pick on me. She was about to start on me one day, only just before she could get a hit in, her can of soda exploded in her hand. She was screaming that it was burning her, but none of the teachers could explain how the cold soda had suddenly risen to boiling point. There were other things too, but I don't have time for that. Anyway, to cut the story short, it turned out that the woman wasn't actually batty. She took out a wand and did a number of various things to prove it, after which she gave me a list with all the supplies I'd need, and told me she'd look forward to seeing me in the new term. My mom and I followed her directions to a place called Diagon Alley, where I bought my stuff, including my wand, my owl, whom of course you have yet to meet, my spell books, my robes, my potion ingredients, as well as a number of other things, and I waited for the day when I would go off to school. The day came, I got on the train and, sure enough, discovered that the castle was real. I studied hard because magic, having always assumed that it was make-believe, was understandably fascinating to me. My mom returned to Phoenix and I visited her each summer, but then come September, I always returned to Hogwarts to resume my magical education. The wizarding world has its problems, though, and big ones, which I discovered not long after my arrival. You see, there are bad wizards as well as good ones, and some of them put the monsters you know to shame. There's one, in particular, that my people are terrified of. I then hastily fed the 7 vampires the details of Voldemort, though I refrained from mentioning his name, along with story of Harry Potter, and the information which had been circulating and painting him as the chosen one destined to defeat the Dark Lord. I also proceeded to inform them of the fake galleon given to me by Hermione Granger when I had become a member of the DA, and the way in which we used it to communicate secret messages during Umbridge's evil reign as High Inquisitor. So you see, I said, I have to go back to Hogwarts. If Harry is back, then something is surely about to kick off and I need to be there. Me more than anyone. I am Muggle-born, as in I come from non-magical parents. People like me are persecuted by the Dark Lord's supporters. That's why I couldn't go back after Dumbledore, the headmaster, was killed last year. It's not safe for my kind mudbloods, they call us, and how can I expect that to change if I don't go back and fight for my freedom? I ended my little speech here, and stared into each of their faces. Alice and Esme looked completely perplexed. Carlisle and Jasper looked worried, and it was obvious they were scared for my sanity. Emmett was trying to keep a straight face, and he clearly thought that this was some elaborate joke. Rosalie looked pissed. Edward, on the other hand, looked pained. There could be no doubt that he had concluded that I had completely lost my marbles. In fact, he was probably getting it into his head that my sudden outburst was all his fault, that he had finally succeeded in pushing me over the edge, simply through his seemingly impossible existence. You don't believe me, I stated matter-of-factly. Bella, he answered, I think you ya know what? I interrupted, tearing myself from his embrace and marching over into the living room to retrieve my bag. I am done explaining. There's only one way to prove it to you. When I returned to the kitchen, not one of them had moved an inch, except Rosalie, who was staring at her reflection in the glass of the windows. I reached into my bag and pulled out my wand. It seemed so wrong not to keep it with me, so I had taken to concealing it in my tiny purse, upon which I had placed an undetectable extension charm. It was 11 inches and made from unicorn hair. I pointed it at the mess I had made on the floor, and said reparo. Instantly, the cracked fragments reformed to make a plate that was as good as it had been originally. Accio plate, I then said, causing it to fly through the air to my hands. I finally turned my wand to the spilled food. I could have performed the spell non-verbally, but I wanted to give a clear demonstration to the Cullens. Evanesco. The lettuce leaves, onion, and tomatoes suddenly disappeared into thin air. I turned to face my gawking family. Each had their eyes fixed on the spot where the spilled salad had been only a second ago, not one displaying any sign that they would ever move again. Just to ensure that the message was fully delivered, I did a graceful little pirouette, well, graceful for me anyway, and apparated from the kitchen. I felt my body stretching from the pressure, and as quickly as it had started, it was over. I was on the far side of the river behind the Cullen house, where they would still have a clear view of me. "Yoo-hoo," I called. They all turned. I laughed at their gobsmacked expressions, before apparating back into the kitchen. If I had had time to waste enjoying the satisfaction of finally revealing that I was not as helpless as they had all initially believed, I would have been grinning like a Cheshire cat. The afternoon light glinted off the galleon, however, providing me with the sobering reminder that I needed to get to Hogwarts. "So that's it," I announced. "I know it's absurd and I wish I had more time to explain it to you, but I don't. I honestly can't imagine that Harry would risk returning to the school now that it's fallen under the control of the Death Eaters unless he was preparing to fight." Death Eaters? What? But Esme's panic was made plain by her expression alone. Her inability to form a proper coherent sentence now only enhanced everyone's awareness. "Bella," Alice cut in, "I don't need to be a psychic to know that what you're planning on doing is going to be extremely dangerous. You could get killed." Edward's head whipped to me. He let out a low growl. "Well, I was actually going to say hurt. Look," I said, addressing them all. They needed to understand just how serious this was, and if there was a chance that I could die in the next 24 hours, I had to be honest with them. "You are vampires. You can kill a human with a single touch. Wizards and witches, on the other hand, don't even need that much. All it takes is 2 simple words and a flick of a wand, and a person dies. They all looked at me, horrified, even Rosalie. People die every day simply for the sport of his sick followers. People like me. Now I turned my eyes on Edward, so that I could better communicate the inevitable, because I knew he would be the hardest to convince. I am going back to Hogwarts now, and no amount of vampiric strength is going to change that fact. No, Edward, I am sorry, but you really don't have a say in this. His jaw clenched for a second, and he accidentally crushed a section of the counter, which he had been gripping throughout our conversation. It would seem that I have no choice but to agree, he said after a moment's pause, surprising me slightly. He straightened himself and crossed his arms, showing no concern whatsoever for the now damaged worktop. So if you really set on this, then I am coming with you. I was about to protest, but stopped myself and considered the benefits of his involvement. His strength and speed would be undoubtedly assets in a fight. Actually, having you there would be a massive comfort. The likelihood of you getting hurt isn't that great. Vampire skin is hard and deflects spells. It would take dozens and dozens of simultaneous attacks to even stun you, probably even more than you would need to stun a dragon, and considering the fact that the enemy will have far too many opponents to focus on. Dragons, Emmett interrupted, disbelievingly. You kidding, right? No, I am not, I answered automatically, noting the way his eyebrows seemed to rise halfway up his brow. As I was saying, your skin will reflect magical attacks, so unless they have invited vampires to the castle recently, I don't think your presence will be damaging to your health. So we could cover you. Act as a shield, I mean, Jasper added. And the other students. That would definitely give us a slight advantage. It's decided then, concluded Alice. We all going. The rest of the Cullens nodded in agreement. Emmett rubbed his hands together and muttered something I didn't fully catch, though I distinctly heard the words take on a dragon. There's just one question, Carlyle said, looking at me curiously. How do we get there? I don't understand, Jasper stated. How is a duffel bag going to help us get to this Hogwarts place of yours? Portus, I said, pointing my wand at the item, before turning to face Jasper. If we were on the right continent and there were less of you, I'd be able to take you by side-along apparition. We're too far away though for that, so the next best thing is to use a portkey. You're supposed to inform the ministry before using one nowadays, but to hell with that. I've set this one to depart in 3 minutes. Everyone needs to place a finger on the bag. Carlyle, Esme, Jasper, Rosalie and Edward all looked a little hesitant. Alice and Emmett, however, looked positively jubilant. My vision wasn't sharp enough to catch their lightning-quick movements as they both went to touch the portkey. Following their example, the others all shuffled in, forming a tight circle as they similarly placed a finger on the bag. So, Bela, what exactly is this ministry you mentioned? Carlyle questioned. Well, I suppose you could compare it to the American Senate, or the English Parliament. It's basically the governing body of wizards and witches that help to run the magical world. They deal with laws and that kind of stuff. And there really are such things as dragons. Emmett chipped in with a hopeful expression. Yes, there are, but I wouldn't go getting any ideas about battling one, Emmett. I am sure it would be far more challenging for you than bears, but they happen to be a protected species. You'd annoy a lot of people if you went around attempting to slay them. Dragon's blood is extremely valuable in the wizarding world, as are dragon heartstrings, which are sometimes used in manufacturing wands. Is that what's in your wand? Alice asked, enthusiastically, a dragon heartstring. No, I answered, mine is made from unicorn hair. Rosalie's head snapped up. You didn't really think you were the only mythical creatures out there, did you? I chuckled, giving a teasing smirk. Alice squealed and began bouncing, though her finger never left the portkey. In the next second, the item began to glow, causing me to wonder whether it was Alice's foresight or her discovery of unicorns that had brought on her sudden excitement. I felt the familiar pull at my navel, before my feet left the hard floor and I began flying through the air in a maelstrom of color. Then the world stopped spinning and my feet slammed into the ground. Predictably, I lost my balance and ended up on my butt. I would have been more embarrassed had it not been for the fact that even the 7 perfect vampires were not fully in control of their usually spotless balance for once. Esme was clutching Carlyle. Alice had her hands raised at either side of her to help keep her upright. Jasper had stumbled slightly against the side of the bar. The others, though they were in definite shock, all seemed to be okay on their feet. That was awesome," Emmett declared, his eyes wide and unfocused, as if staring at something far off in the distance. I stared around the room. It was dim, the only light coming from the embers flickering in the fireplace. The darkness confused me at first, until I remembered the considerable time difference existing between the UK and the Eastern Pacific. Yes, it was definitely the Hog's Head, though why we were asked to come here I had no idea. My puzzlement was about to be answered, however, as an old-looking wizard with long gray hair and a stringy beard came running into the room. More. That's just my luck. Should have known I'd get no bloody peace after Potter and his friends. You've seen Harry. The man focused his bright, blue eyes on me, regarding me for a second before huffing and throwing his arms in the air. Bah, yes, I've seen him. Him and his friends set off the ruddy caterwauling charm, didn't they? Had to shoo away the damn Death Eaters, didn't I? So where are they now? They went up to the castle. There's a secret passageway behind that portrait, he said, pointing to a painting of a pretty girl with blonde hair, which leads to the room of requirement. Seriously? I asked, impressed, to which I was met with a look of extreme annoyance. Okay, well, we'll just be going then. For the first time, the man seemed to examine the others occupying the room. He stiffened and inhaled sharply. Vampires. Girl, what the hell are you playing at? He took out his wand and shot a shield between us and the Cullens, who were all evidently wondering how the man knew what they were. I winced, which did not go unnoticed by Edward. He turned his eyes on me and regarded me suspiciously. You always knew, didn't you? He accused. I was about to speak, but was saved from doing so when a loud popping sound announced the arrival of others. I turned and scanned the bar, and was met by a sight that made me feel like bursting into song. On the far side of the room stood 2 familiar figures, one whom appeared to be glancing nervously at the Cullens, and one whom was gazing around with a pleasantly serene expression. Luna, Dean, I cried happily, running forwards to embrace my schoolmates. Bela, said Dean, a little shocked, though a note of happiness could be heard in his voice. Hello, Bela, it's been an awfully long time since I last saw you. You have far less Raxperts buzzing around you lately. Does that have something to do with your vampire friends? Probably. I laughed, before introducing her and Dean to the Cullens. Dean remained wary, but Luna walked dreamily up to Edward and placed her arms around his neck in a way that only she would. It's very nice to meet you, she said, pulling back, unfazed by the absolutely flabbergasted expression pasted on Edward's face. The others, too, looked bewildered. I chuckled. I am so happy Bela has found someone to keep her Raxperts at bay. They extremely pesky little creatures, but, of course, you wouldn't know about that, would you? Vampire brains never go fuzzy. At least, now you know why. I guess so. Thanks. Seeing Edward so speechless was nothing short of hilarious. Well, I guess we should be on our way, Luna announced, or they might start without us. Surely you're not going with them? The man shouted, using his wand to indicate the Cullens. Oh, for Merlin's sake. They don't hunt humans. Look at their eyes, I shouted, releasing my frustration on the bar owner. They gold, which means they feed off animals. The man grunted and lowered his wand, though his irritation did not vanish entirely. Goodbye, then, Mr. Aberforth. Wait, Aberforth, as in Aberforth Dumbledore. Behind me, I heard Emmett muttering to Rosalie, wondering what was up with all these crazy names. That's right. Now are you going or what? No doubt there'll be more of you disturbing me shortly, he grumbled, and I certainly can't fit all of you in my bar without causing a stir. I turned to the portrait and waited for it to swing open. As I was about to step into the tunnel, I heard Luna addressing the group behind me. May we ride you? I spun. I beg your pardon, Rosalie asked, clearly offended. Emmett almost choked from laughing. May we ride you? Luna repeated, before continuing with her explanation. The sooner we get to the castle, the the sooner we'll be able to help our friends. Who knows what's going on up there? They could be facing death as we speak. Once again, the vampires were gobsmacked. It probably had more to do with the confident and dreamy way in which Luna had posed her question, rather than the question itself. Emmett, unlike the others, was in hysterics. He let out a roar of laughter, before walking up to the peculiar girl and swinging her up onto his back. I climbed onto Edward's, whilst Dean reluctantly took Carlise's. Once we were all in place, we darted off up the passage, and in no time at all, we were exiting into a vast luxurious room, decorated with red, blue, and yellow hanging tapestries, along with countless bookcases loaded with volumes ancient in appearance, comfortable-looking hammocks, and massive beanbags. "We got your message, Neville," Luna stated. "Hello you three, I thought you must be here." A cheer erupted amongst the crowd assembled in the room, and yells of Bela, Luna, Dean met our ears. I felt the crushing pressure as students closed in from all sides to embrace us, whilst my family remained stationary, observing the scene before them. I recognized the faces of the Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, and Hufflepuff students. Some were bruised and swollen in places. The disciplinary system at Hogwarts had clearly changed since my last visit. As well as Harry Potter, Ron Weasley, and Hermione Granger, Neville Longbottom, Seamus Finnegan, Lavender Brown, Terry Boot, Ernie Macmillan, Anthony Goldstein, Michael Corner, and the Pottle twins were also present. There were others, too, who I couldn't put names to. "Hi, everyone," said Luna happily. "Oh, it's great to be back, Luna," said Harry as he made his way to greet her. "What are you doing here?" "How did you?" "I sent for her," said Neville, holding up his own fake galleon. "I promised her and Ginny that if you turned up I'd let them know." "How did you find out, Bella?" I laughed and flashed my bracelet at him, which I had put back on just after creating the portkey. "I thought it would make good costume jewelry." "Excellent," Neville responded with a toothy grin. "Who are the newcomers?" "Vampires," Hermione whispered, her eyes glued to my family, all of whom were stood in silence and wearing nervous expression, possibly anticipating some kind of rejection. I straightened my posture and made sure to fill my voice with as much confidence as I could. "This is Dr. Cullen and his family. I met them in Washington. They're extremely kind and have saved my life on numerous occasions. Their diet is a little different from your average vampire, in that they live off of animals rather than humans." I directed a stern expression at the occupants of the room, daring anyone to challenge me. "They want to help." I had expected some form of protest, but to my relief and extreme delight, the only sound spreading throughout the room was that of approving murmurs, and I took it that my fellow students were expressing their appreciation for more than just the additional help the Cullens were sure to provide. I rolled my eyes. Once again, Neville shouted out words like excellent and brilliant before marching up to Carlisle, grabbing his hand and shaking it with eagerness. The fact that regular humans experienced instinctual fear when they were in close proximity with the vampires only seemed to enhance their disbelieving. Yet happy smiles as the wizard made his accepting gesture. Alice's face lit up. Esme looked close to tears. Rosalie was wearing a proud, satisfied smile. Emmett had one that touched his eyes. Carlis was appreciative as he returned Neville's handshake. Jasper looked on in awe and Edward was in shock. His head turned to me, and I saw some emotion swimming his eyes that I could only guess at. "Gratitude. This is all really great and everything, but you still haven't explained what you all doing here," said Harry. "Well," answered Neville, "we all thought that if you came back, it would mean revolution. That we were going to overthrow Snape and the Carrows." Whilst the others continued the discussion, I whispered aside to the Cullens, filling them in on Snape's treachery and how the Ministry, which had fallen under the control of the Death Eaters, had put the story out that it was Harry who had been the one involved in Dumbledore's death. It was just as I was finishing the explanation that the portrait door swung open behind us, and in came Ginny Weasley, her brothers, Fred and George, and Lee Jordan, followed by Harry's ex-girlfriend, Cho Chang. I ran forwards and hugged the boys, all of whom met me with whoops as they ruffled my hair and patted me on the back. Fred threw an arm around my shoulder, as did George on my other side. "Missed us, did you, Belle?" George laughed. "Of course she did," Fred said seriously, stroking his cheek with his free hand. "Who wouldn't miss this face? It's divine." "I couldn't agree more," said George, and I responded with a laugh. The Cullens, especially Edward, were now looking at me questioningly. We weren't in the same year, but we became friends when I made the Gryffindor Quidditch team, I explained, forgetting that the vampires knew nothing of the wizarding sport. Trouble, this one, said Fred, nodding his head in my direction. He then turned his eye on Rosalie, Alice and Esme, all of whom were receiving quite a bit of attention from the wizards in the room. As Bella has forgotten her manners and hasn't introduced us properly, I am Fred Weasley, and this is my dashing brother, George. The three females laughed, Rosalie again wearing a very satisfied smile, undoubtedly content that she was drawing so many adoring gazes. The men chuckled at Fred's nerve, though it was obvious that they took a liking to him. It was difficult not to. Aberforth's getting a bit ratty, Fred said, addressing Harry and Neville. He wants a kip, and his bar's turned into a railway station. It wasn't long until Harry began arguing with the crowd. Apparently, he, Hermione and Ron hadn't returned to fight. They had some other business at Hogwarts instead, though whatever it was remained a mystery to the rest of us. The three began whispering to each other, at which point I rejoined Edward, who was looking off in the direction of the trio. Edward, why are they here? I asked, for I knew he'd be able to discover the reason. The crease returned to the space between his eyes, and it was a few seconds before he leaned his head close to mine to whisper in my ear. I don't really understand it properly. They looking for something called a Horcrux, but it's not a word I've ever come across. Do you know what it is? I've never heard of it, I replied, shaking my head. His head remained bowed, but his eyes flicked up to look at Ron from beneath his long, thick lashes. Wait, there's something about a soul. Something about destroying a soul. Something to do with a raven's claw. What significance does a raven have in all this? Ravenclaw is one of the 4 houses of Hogwarts. There's also Gryffindor, which is the house I am in, as well as Hufflepuff and Slytherin. Slytherin is the house which usually produces Death Eaters. That's why there are no green and silver banners in here. The room hasn't had to accommodate for anyone belonging to that particular house. All right, he answered, but why would they have to destroy the soul of someone belonging to Ravenclaw? They wouldn't, I said simply, meeting him with a look of puzzlement. My eyes flitted to the bookcases lining the room and I shuffled closer to one. I need a book containing information on Horcruxes, I whispered, hoping that the room would answer my request. I inhaled sharply as it responded, a large, thick, ancient-looking book appearing on the uppermost shelf. I snatched it down and looked briefly at the family, all of whom looked shocked again, yet impressed. The book was labeled Secrets of the Darkest Art. That definitely didn't sound good. Whatever dark magic Harry had been battling, it was clearly something extremely evil, which, of course, was to be expected considering the enemy he was up against. I am actually surprised at how well you all taking this, I murmured as I flipped open the book. Is there an alternative at present? Edward asked, a hint of sarcasm audible in his tone. Not really. Right, what is a Horcrux? This entire book is completely based on the subject of them. Maybe the explanation is given in the introduction, I said, as I read the opening lines. I had only been reading for a minute when Harry began speaking to the crowd again, but even that was enough. The first 12 lines had told me everything I needed to know, and now I felt positively sick. I would have vomited right there and then if my stomach hadn't been empty. What does it say? Edward whispered. I couldn't reply, so, instead, I just passed him the book, allowing him to read it for himself. I saw his lips moving, though I heard no sound, and understood that he was reading the passage to his family at a level the rest of us couldn't hear. I turned my attention back to Harry. There's something we need to find, he stated loudly. Something that'll help us overthrow you know who. It's here at Hogwarts, but we don't know where. It might have belonged to Ravenclaw. Has anyone heard of an object like that? Has anyone ever come across something with her eagle on it, for instance? Luna then spoke up, suggesting that the object Harry was seeking could in fact be the lost diadem. A conversation followed and it was decided that Luna would accompany him to the Ravenclaw common room where he would be able to view an image of Rowena's treasure. As the pair left, I saw Ron and Hermione resume their whispered conversation. If we knew more about what they were trying to do, perhaps we would be able to help. I was about to ask Edward to read their minds when he spoke. So this evil lord, what's his name? We don't say it. Or, at least, the majority don't. I've never understood the fear people seem to experience when they hear the name. Well, anyway, he's called Lord Voldemort. I would have told you back at the house, but the name was jinxed recently. It was announced on the Wizard Wireless, which is why I couldn't say it. We protected here though by powerful enchantments. Edward nodded, doing his best to follow. I could understand the difficulty even for a vampire. This life-altering information was all hitting him way too fast. He was being launched into a battle in a world he had had no idea of until about half an hour ago. Right, so this Voldemort has performed some spell to split his soul, and has transferred the other pieces into various objects, meaning that he can never die. Yes, except it's not the plural. Harry, Ron and Hermione are only looking for one object. Actually, Edward corrected me, I think it is the plural. When Harry left he asked Ron and Hermione to look after the other one, and when I read Ron's mind he was thinking about a goblet and how to destroy it. But, wait, I panicked, the implications of this triggering a suffocating wave of horror. If Voldemort has the ability to split his soul more than once, there could be God only knows how many Horcruxes out there to find. No, I think they knew exactly how many there were when they set out on their hunt for them. Your old headmaster left them with specific details. From what I can gather, there was a ring and a locket, both of which were destroyed with a sword. The sword of Gryffindor. Yes, Ron's wondering how to get into the head's office so that he can get his hands on a hat. I don't understand. The sorting hat, I explained. Harry pulled the sword out of it in second year. It presents itself to those who demonstrate courage. It's the quality which defines true Gryffindors. Edward gave a small smile and his eyes smoldered as they roamed my face. I unsuccessfully attempted to suppress the inevitable blush. If he can get to the hat, maybe it will present itself to him, I reasoned. I mean, he's obviously demonstrated that quality countless times in recent months if he's been off doing what we think he has. Maybe, Edward answered. Now he's talking to Hermione about the other Horcruxes. Voldemort has a snake, right? Yeah, well, he's also managed to transfer a piece of his soul to his pet, and I think Ron's just had an idea. What? He was thinking about the snake, and it led his thoughts to the giant one that Harry fought in the Chamber of Secrets. Again I could understand why this was confusing Edward and his family. It was all foreign to them. Yeah, there was a basilisk living beneath the school. His sister, Ginny, released it when she was possessed by Voldemort's diary. I know that sounds nuts, but actually it doesn't. Edward interrupted, because, according to Ron, the diary was a Horcrux too. My facial muscles suddenly went slack. I felt like I had just been plunged into freezing cold water, or that someone had injected a shot of it into my veins, and now it was pumping around my body, stealing every morsel of heat. That fits, I whispered. Edward nodded. And Harry destroyed the Horcrux with a basilisk fang. I looked over in Ron and Hermione's direction and saw them slipping from view. They going to the Chamber of Secrets, aren't they? Yes, Edward said simply, gazing over my head to the spot from which the two had just disappeared. Bella, there's something else. I looked back at him, and I knew that Jasper was informing him silently of the terror that one little sentence had provoked. I don't really know how. Perhaps Harry has a similar ability to Alice, but before he left, he had a vision. It's Voldemort. He knows that Harry is destroying Horcruxes. He's checking to see which ones are safe, and which have been taken, which means, he's coming here. Edward didn't need Jasper this time to realize my fear the second the words were out. My heart flew into overtime. I could feel it banging against my ribcage and, suddenly, there didn't seem to be enough air to fill my desperate lungs, which seemed to be shrinking with the pressure of my terror. Immediately I was in Edward's arms. He scooped me up and pressed me to his chest, rocking me gently as I fully absorbed his words. It's okay, Bella, Emmett said in his attempt to reassure me. We'll fight him. We won't let him hurt you. You don't understand, I whispered. It's not me I am concerned about. I'll have you to help deflect the jinxes and curses should any fly my way, but there aren't enough of you to protect every student in this school. If Voldemort is coming, I added fearfully, my eyes roaming over the faces of my many friends, then the chances of everyone surviving the fight are virtually zero. If Voldemort is coming, I have no idea how many, but there will be people in this room that want to live out the night. The Cullens' faces all now reflected my horror. They looked about the room and considered the gravity of my statement. But they re practically children, Esme whispered. They re just children. Do you think that matters to him? He tried to kill Harry when he was only a toddler. People like me and Hermione Granger mudbloods and those like the Weasleys who associate with us blood traitors we re-vermin in his eyes. He wouldn't think twice about killing us. Low growls erupted from both Edward and Alice. From Edward it was only to be expected, however. It was strange hearing such a small, pixie-like creature like Alice release such feral sound. Imagine placing an immortal Hitler in the middle of a room filled with defenseless Jewish families. Now, give him and his officers wands that each have the potential to be more lethal than an atomic rifle. That's what it's like. To some of them, it's little more than a fun and productive game that achieves the desired social cleansing. They torture us just for the sheer satisfaction of it, and then they kill us, or anyone else who got in their way. And after they finish, they continue rounding up the Muggle-borns on the outside. Azkaban will probably have to be extended before long, either that or they'll have to build a second Auschwitz. I've lived with some of these people for 6 years of my life and have known them for 7. I had nodded my head in the direction of Neville and the rest of the 7th-year Gryffindors, and my vision blurred with the film of moisture. They almost like siblings. How would you feel if you knew someone was coming, and would succeed in killing at least one member of your family? How would you feel if there was nothing you could do that would make damn bit of difference? The tears rolled down my face. I turned my head into Edward's chest to prevent any of the nearby students from noticing. He didn't speak, none of them did, for there wasn't really anything to say. Eventually I decided to address a subject that I knew would not bode well with Edward. Edward, I realize that you'll do everything you can to protect me, but... Bella, he warned. No, hear me out. I understand that you'll do your best, but these aren't vampires we're facing. You can beat them simply through strength alone. If something happens to me, which it might, we're not discussing this, Bella. I refuse to allow any creature, no matter what species they are, to rip you away from me, especially not now when I've only just come to terms with the idea of keeping you forever. I knew it was pointless to argue, so I took a different approach. I love you, as I do you. I smiled then, and cast my mind back to a happier time. Would you like to hear a secret? Do you want to know the first moment I knew we were meant for each other, or, at least, the first moment I knew I would never love anyone more than you? Edward's expression softened as he looked into my tear-stained face. He nodded. The rest of his family were listening, but I really didn't care. It was when we were in the cafeteria at school and you were telling me about your hunting habits. You were talking about Emmett's favorite and how he's like a bear. I heard a distinct chuckle from said bear at that point. And then I asked you about your favorite, and you told me mountain lion. Edward nodded at the memory, though his expression betrayed his confusion at why this moment was such a defining one for me. You said you were like the lion, and that maybe preference was indicative. That was when I knew. I don't understand, he admitted softly. Well, you see, it was at that moment when I chose to conjure my Patronus. It traveled through the air and circled our group, emitting brilliant light that made Edward appear even more impossibly beautiful as it touched his marble skin. My Patronus is a lion. It always has been. The shape a person's Patronus takes usually reveals something of their character. It can indicate their qualities and personality, or sometimes it assumes the same form of the Patronus cast by the one they're in love with. The shape of mine never made sense to me. I've been known to be protective, I guess, but I would never have compared myself to a lion. It was a mystery to me, until I met you. I guess we were destined for each other. The lion moved back towards us until its head was an inch from Edward's chest. Then, just before it faded into nothing, it touched its temple to the area in which laid his heart. His eyes lingered on the spot where it had made contact, before he lifted his face to mine and kissed me. It was gentle, but it managed to convey more meaning than any sentence could ever deliver. When he pulled back, his expression was unbelievably tender. He stroked my cheek with one hand, whilst holding me with the other. He was about to speak when the portrait door swung open once again, and in filed a line of familiar faces, resulting in loud cheers and lots of clapping. I recognized those with whom I had once played Quidditch. There was Oliver Wood, Katie Bell, and Angelina Johnson. I was stood close to the secret entrance, which was probably why they approached me first. The girls ran at me, and I only just had enough time to pull away from Edward before they pounced, embracing some part of torso in bone-crushing hugs. "Bella, you okay?" "Of course I am," I laughed. "Why wouldn't I be? We were worried they might have gotten to you," Angelina explained. "With the Muggle-born registration rubbish, well, we didn't know whether or not you would have presented yourself." "Why would I go and do something like that? Did you go into hiding?" asked Katie. "No, I just moved back to the States instead." "Right, of course. Well, that makes sense. Why didn't we think of that, Katie?" "Maybe you both got hit in the head with a bludger one too many times," I laughed. Angelina hit my arm lightly in response, chuckling as she did so. Wood, who had just finished greeting the Weasley twins, came over to say hello. Like the girls, he gave me a similar bone-crushing hug, lifting me off the floor and swinging me around. "Wood, can't breathe," I wheezed. Tut, Swan. Have you forgotten the no-pain attitude already? You've been out of the game too long. Weakness, that is, weakness." We all laughed in unison, before I directed their attention over to the Cullens. "Guys, I'd like you to meet Edward, my fiancé. And this is his vegetarian vampire family. They follow a strictly no-human diet." Edward beamed at me. I guess he really liked being introduced as my future husband. "Whoa, hold up, you re-engaged?" Angelina blurted. "Merlin's beard," Katie exclaimed. "That's mental." "Congratulations, Bella," I smiled. "I love how you guys are more surprised by Bella's bombshell that she's getting married, rather than the fact that she's getting hitched to a vampire." "No offense, of course," Wood said, now addressing Edward. "I just think it's pretty amusing that their priorities are marked so clearly." Edward laughed, grasping Wood's hand when he offered it for a handshake. "Don't be fooled by that sweet exterior, mate," he warned. "She might look tame, but she's a devil, I swear." I lost count of how many Slytherins she fouled when she first made the team. It was basis of her appeal. "What are you talking about?" Edward asked, clearly amused despite his confusion. "You know, Quidditch. Did she not tell you she was on the Gryffindor house team?" "She's a natural-born chaser." "What's Quidditch?" Emmett asked over Edward's shoulder. The jaws of my friends dropped at precisely the same moment, before they rounded on me. "You didn't tell them about Quidditch?" Wood asked, disbelief coloring his tone. "How could you not tell them about Quidditch? That's criminal." "Well, I only just told them about the existence of wizards and witches. I've been a bit more concerned with explaining about the war. Honestly, Wood, Quidditch isn't exactly a priority at the moment." The expression this last comment provoked indicated that it had obviously been an inconsiderate and offensive thing to say. He turned his back on me and began explaining the sport to the Cullens, all of whom listened on with rapt attention. "And is it difficult, then, to make the teams?" Esme questioned. "Absolutely. You have to be able to handle a broom with ease, which not everyone can do. You also need to be agile and well-balanced. And you telling us Bella fits those requirements?" "Ha," Emmett boomed. "Do you even know her at all?" "Probably better than you do, mate," said Fred as he came walking up to the group. "I know her gracefulness is abysmal on the ground, but you haven't seen her in the air. She definitely compensates." "Did you tell them how ruthless she can be, Wood?" asked George. "I am not that bad," I protested. "Tell that to Malfoy," he retorted, before turning his attention back to the Cullens. He was about to catch the snitch once, only Bella wouldn't stand for that. She flew into his path so that he had to swerve to prevent a collision, but being the pillock that he is, he flew into the goal post and knocked himself out. And then, of course, there was the time you used that excuse that a bludger was about to hit you to fly into Montague and accidentally headbutt him. It couldn't possibly have anything to do with the fact that he cast a toenail-growing hex on you 2 days before. He had it coming, I muttered, shuffling my feet and suddenly finding my shoes very visually interesting. When I looked up again, the Cullens each had eyes as wide as saucers. I'd never been one for Muggle sports, so they had never had the opportunity to witness my competitive streak. It was probably a good thing. Thankfully, I was saved from my embarrassment when the portrait opened again, providing us all with the distraction of more newcomers, some of whom I recognized. First there was Remus Lupin, our old defense teacher. Next came Kingsley Shacklebolt, who had been at the ministry the night I had gone with Harry and the others into the Department of Mysteries. Then, surprisingly, Fleur Delacour walked in, her hand clutching that of a man with flaming red hair. I assumed this must be one of the Weasleys. I guessed Bill, because he was the only brother I hadn't met, though I'd only seen his younger sibling, Charlie, once at the Tri-Wizard tournament. There was also Mr. and Mrs. Weasley, both of whom I had met on various occasions during the school holidays whilst I had been visiting the Burrow to play Quidditch with the twins. Mr. Weasley had set up a portkey for me numerous times, back in the days when I hadn't been experienced enough to perform the spell. Mrs. Weasley ran up to our group after catching sight of the terrible twosome, ensnaring them both in a mighty hug. Before she left to see Ginny, she patted me on the cheek and gave me a quick but affectionate embrace. The group dispersed then, and I was left with just my family. "So, you play dirty then, Bella?" Emmett asked. I rolled my eyes at him. "Edward, whereabouts in the castle is Harry? Could you search for him? He's just left the Ravenclaw common room with an elderly woman in a tartan dressing gown, Professor McGonagall." "I am sorry, Bella. I should have been keeping tabs on him, but I just assumed that he'd be okay considering he has an invisibility cloak. I was watching Ron and Hermione instead." "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Harry was attacked by the Carrows in the common room, but apparently they've been taken care of." Edward, your professor has just run into Snape." He, Edward inhaled sharply and my heart went into double time again. "Bella, I can't read Snape's mind." "Why can't I read Snape's mind?" I exhaled. "I think Snape must be an accomplished Occlumens. It's a special branch of magic that helps to protect the mind from intrusion. It's a rare gift. Not many people bother to learn it." "Did you learn it?" he asked inquisitively. I nodded. "I once saw Harry being possessed by Voldemort. I'd managed to get away from a battle we were having with a group of Death Eaters, because I wanted to go and help him. I saw his face when it happened and it terrified me. For weeks I had nightmares about being possessed, so I did some research and learned that the best way to prevent it was through occlumency. It was very difficult to learn and it took me the best part of a year, but I got it in the end. I think what you do must be a form of legilimency. It's not possession, but it's similar in that it involves mental intrusion. I guess that's why you can hear Occlumens like me, because we know how to defend our minds." Edward remained silent as he took in my words, then suddenly he announced, "They re-fighting. Snape and McGonagall." The whole family was looking at Edward now, all of us waiting with bated breath. "Alice, who will win?" Jasper asked. "I don't know, Jazz. I haven't been able to see anything since that first vision. Something is blocking me. Remus Lupin over there is a werewolf. An actual werewolf. Your vision probably stopped when he heard we were gathering and decided to come." I turned my attention back to Edward. "There's a giant serpent about to attack McGonagall. It's turned to smoke. Now she's sending daggers at she's missed. He used a suit of armor to shield himself. Now there are other people there. There's a tiny man and a plump woman. That'll be Flitwick and Sprout," I blurted. "And there's a big, roundish man in silk pajamas. Slughorn." Edward described the rest of the fight, which culminated in Snape's cowardly flight from the castle after he jumped through a high window. He then proceeded to inform us that the teachers were performing defensive spells to protect the castle. Professor McGonagall is speaking to Professor Slughorn. She's telling him that if he or any of the Slytherins attempt to sabotage the resistance they'll duel to kill. "You mean, the teachers would kill the students?" Carlyle asked appalled. "Carlis," I addressed him, "I know this is difficult to grasp, but you have to understand that this is a war. An actual full-on war, not a school ground brawl. It's no secret that the Slytherins are fans of the unforgivable curses. Most of their parents are Death Eaters. Their offspring have adopted the same principles. If any of them try to sabotage the resistance, as McGonagall put it, they'll be doing so knowing that their actions will contribute to the death of Harry and his allies. Only those of age will be allowed to stay, which in the wizarding world is those 17 and over, so it's not like we LL not be battling children. We LL be fighting adults wielding dangerous magic who happen to be attempting to kill us. I know it's horrible, but it's just the way it is. Slughorn isn't going to side with the Death Eaters, Edward told us. He doesn't like the idea of going up against them, but he knows which side he'll pick if he has to. I nodded. I'd never thought of Slughorn as the usual breed of Slytherin. He was ambitious and resourceful, yes, but I'd realized quickly that he didn't share the same prejudice of Muggle-borns as those of his house. Harry and Luna are on their way to instruct everyone to go to the Great Hall where evacuation procedures will be discussed. All right, just so you know, everyone, I said to them, surprising myself in the way I suddenly seemed to have adopted the role as temporary leader. The most important person in this entire battle is Harry. When we went to the Ministry to fight off the Death Eaters in 5th year, we discovered that they were after a prophecy about Harry and Voldemort. Though it smashed before any of us could hear it, I am guessing that it had something to do with the final battle. Most people believe, as do I, that only Harry can kill Voldemort. If Harry dies, it's over. It's vital that we do everything in our ability to protect him. Got it. Everyone nodded as Remus's voice announced Harry's arrival. Harry, what's happening? Harry looked astonished as he stared at the crowd, probably wondering how it could have expanded so much since he had last laid eyes on it. Fred informed him that he and his brother had sent messages to the rest of the DA who had, in turn, alerted the Order of the Phoenix. What's first, Harry? Called George. What's going on? They re-evacuating the younger kids and everyone's meeting in the Great Hall to get organized, we re-fighting. A roar filled the room and everyone began moving towards the door. I grasped Edward's hand in mine and squeezed. Time to go. We followed the alternative college students from the room of requirement and emerged into the 7th ground corridor. I seemed over at the others and watched their faces as they reacted to the fortress. I failed to need to miss something. No longer even the maximum insignificant of information. I would imagine countless instances what it might sense like to ultimately have the ability to reveal them the actual me, the Bela that turned into strong and effective, in preference to the meek little creature they had been used to. During my time at Hogwarts, I were something but that. I used to be reputable among my buddies for my Quidditch competencies and my involvement with the DA. Due to my strong friendship with Fred and George, I'd additionally been regarded to partake in some of their schemes, like the time I had helped them area their transportable swamps in our mutinous efforts towards Dolores Umbridge. My involvement in numerous Weasley antics therefore earned me a bit of a popularity, though it wasn't quite as notorious as my comrades. I had always striven hard to expand my know-how of magic because, understandably, I loved it so completely. After I were pressured to restriction the amount I done after shifting to Forks, but it became no wonder why I had developed my photograph because the fragile, shy female. For 6 years I were residing outside Muggle society. Upon returning to it, I used to be extraordinarily cautious with a view to prevent frightening suspicion, maybe a little too cautious. Further, my absence from that global had additionally intended that I was initially a little socially awkward. While my friends have been discussing their favorite television programs, as an instance, I could not maintain up with the topic. My personal interests and theirs were worlds aside. I questioned what Edward could suppose whilst he fully observed what I used to be like in my natural surroundings. Might he be disappointed? While we reached the brink of the corridor, we filed through the entrance and out onto the grand staircase. I heard Esme gasp and had the delight of seeing Rosalie's eyes nearly pop out of her head. Carlisle's eyes, too, have been huge, and Emmett's mouth become striking open. Rattling. Jasper mouthed as he leant over the railing to peer down the levels. How large is this location, Bella? We are at the 7th ground in the meantime. You should see it from the outdoor. And the grounds are pretty full size. We've a wooded area proper next door that houses all sorts of magical creatures. Like unicorns? Rosalie asked, not able to mask her pleasure. I nodded and smiled at her as we started to descend the steps. Bella, yes, Carlisle. Are the ones people within the photos truly moving? I laughed loudly this time. After the whole thing he'd seen, this amazed him. Yes, they may be, I told him, pointing to the image of the fat girl as we arrived at the entrance to the Gryffindor not unusual room. That is the portrait that guards the way into Gryffindor. You need a password to enter. I waved my hand on the Fats lady, thankful that the faces of the Cullens had been in my line of sight. "Hiya, Pricey," she stated. "Hello," I answered. "It has been a while seeing that I closing noticed you. It's correct to be lower back." The vampires stood as rigid as statues. I kept my face straight, but best just internally, I was roaring with laughter. There may be speak approximately the fort that a battle is set to take location. Is it proper? Sure, it is. A number of us may be staying to shield the faculty. The underaged and the Slytherins will be leaving. Feel loose to boo the Slytherins as they make their manner out. I am certain nobody will bitch. I will endure that during mind, Pricey. Bye, I stated as I grew to become and commenced descending again. That is all totally not possible, Bella, said Edward. You had been just talking to a painting. Clearly, it were rude to disregard her. However, she, after which he shook his head and gave up, seeming to accept the not possible and my unquestionable good judgment. We in the end reached the lowest of the staircase and was the splendid hall. Another time, the Cullens iced over, their eyes assaulted through what need to had been to them in first-rate sight. The enchanted ceiling turned into dark and scattered with stars. Hundreds of tiny candles were suspended in mid-air, though their flames have been small sufficient that their glow did not dim the starry view. The torches striking in brackets on the walls of the first-rate corridor, but, provided sufficient light to look by way of. I would have favored to have spent longer appreciating the sight, but there have been more vital matters to attend to. I led my family to the Gryffindor desk. We sat down one two-way up Jasper, Alice, Edward, and myself on one facet, the four remaining vampires seated on the opposite. I talked about the faculty ghosts, and turned into once more met by 7 pairs of golden eyes that have been extensive with disbelief. Simply expect that every supernatural being you've got ever heard of is real, and you will be pleasant, I cautioned. I gave what I hoped became an encouraging smile, and then turned my head to stand the raised platform, anticipating the assembly to start. In the meantime, the more youthful students commenced submitting into the corridor. Some were draped in visiting cloaks, but maximum were wearing pajamas and dressing robes. Mermaids, Esme said, a vivid look in her eyes. Huh, mermaids, she repeated. Are they real? Oh right, I responded, pulling myself collectively. Yes, they are. There are a few dwelling within the lake outdoor. It is also the home of the large squid. If it hadn't been Esme who had asked the question, they probably would have assumed I was using sarcasm. That became typically reserved for her youngsters even though, in order that they normal my words. Wow, Alice whispered, I want to satisfy one. They are now not what you'd assume mermaids to be like. They a ways from stunning. Certainly they a touch horrifying, and pretty vicious at instances. What about goblins? Requested Jasper. They exist too. They usually address treasure. They look after Gringotts, the wizard financial institution. Elves. Requested Emmett. Yep, there are residence elves lurking all around the castle. Phoenixes. You cited an order of the Phoenix in advance, Carlyle mentioned. I did, and, sure, they do exist. Dumbledore had one known as Fawkes, however it left after he died. I pointed to Firenze as he entered the hall. Look, there may be Firenze. He stalks the divination training with Professor Trelawney. There are different centaurs dwelling in the fore. Excuse me, a voice interjected from my right. I regarded over to see a small boy, probably a primary 12 months, peering in our course. He became huddled amongst a crowd of children of similar a long time, and became wearing an expression of excitement and fascination, as had been some of his buddies. Others appeared barely frightened, but curious nonetheless. Yes, I asked civilly. We've got heard, someone said, and we were questioning. Are you? He appeared into the faces of my circle of relatives, his eyes ultimately settling on Emmett. A huge grin unfolded throughout his face as he persisted in hushed tones. Are you actually vampires? Every person is announcing which you are. They may be saying you are a circle of relatives of pleasant non-human ingesting vampires and that you've come to help shield the school. Is it genuine? Sure. We're right here to do anything we can to assist, said Carlyle, who changed into manifestly a bit unsure of the way to reply, unused to admitting the info of his species and family so brazenly. The little boy became back in on his buddies, quickly after which quiet, little giggles will be heard spilling from the group. Having realized that the vampires were friendly, the rest of the children seemed to grow to be greater assured. They leaned down the table to get a higher appearance, and one even scooted down so that he became sat simplest a yard away from Emmett, who regarded surprised that the youngsters regarded to find him much less implementing than completely grown adults typically did. The relaxation followed the boy's lead and shuffled closer. How strong are you? I have heard that vampires are extremely good, robust, and lightning short. Slow smiles began creeping onto the faces of the Cullens. Obviously the freedom of no longer having to hide their real identification turned into simply as enjoyable and freeing for them because it became for me. I smiled. Content material inside the knowledge that I had sooner or later been capable of provide them something they could admire. I simply needed I could have introduced them to my world under higher instances. You may say we are quite sturdy, Emmett grinned. We fight bears and mountain lions with our bare palms. We can chunk through any substance within the international, and weigh down metal to dust with minimum attempt. Wow, the youngsters chorused, each of them transfixed on Emmett, who seemed elated on the truth that he became receiving any such fantastic reaction. Right here, display us, said a lovely little brunette with thick hair that fell in tight ringlets approximately her tanned face. She exceeded Emmett one of the gold candelabras that stood lining the desk. Emmett become about to carry out the trick whilst a boy interrupted, no wait. I think you should do it, he stated, pointing at Alice and grinning with a grin that touched his eyes. You re the smallest, so it will likely be manner extra superb if you could weigh down it. Alice laughed and took the candelabra as Emmett handed it to her. She broke the thick backside stand off without an extra attempt than a human might when breaking up a bar of chocolate, before handing the larger phase to her husband. The eyes of the kids went huge as she closed her palms across the gold object, grinning as she did so. Whilst she opened her palm again, the block had grew to become to dust. Alice added her hand to her lips and blew. The dirt flew into the air and commenced falling in swirls, glittering because it caught the amber light of the torches. Because the glitter hit the table, the kids appeared to go out their trance, and all broke out with happy laughs and grateful cheers. The laughing turned into infectious, and it became little more than a 2D earlier than we had been all grinning and guffawing collectively. Very well, now it's your flip, I stated, smiling at the kids. My friends only simply learned approximately witches and wizards nowadays, so I am positive they will be inspired by way of anything you can show them. Who wants to restore the candelabra? I will do it, said the boy who had initiated the conversation. I don't forget this one. He pulled his wand from his pocket and pointed it at the damaged object nevertheless held in Jasper's alabaster hand. As he shouted out the spell Reparo, I smiled and winked at Edward whose lips twitched in reaction. The sparkling grains flew up from the desk and reconnected themselves, leaving the golden item as desirable as new. The Cullens and I cheered and clapped by this factor. My circle of relatives had already witnessed magic a long way extra superior than a easy repairing attraction, however they have been all eager to reward the child. I suspected that this turned into partially due to the reality that any magic to them at the moment became astounding, however simple, and partly because they have been appreciative of little boys' trusting and accepting mindset. I cheered because I too was grateful for his behavior in the direction of my own family, and that I honestly like him for it. The boy became manifestly happy with our reactions and inspired by using his handiwork. He regarded up at Rosalie, who had clapped and cheered the loudest, and gave her a cheeky smile. She looked at him lovingly and beamed, however her pleasure visibly became to horror as a pearly frame floated down to fill the distance between me and the teenager. Properly, howdy there, pass over Swan, stated nearly headless Nick, it's top to see you again for the combat. It's miles handiest to be anticipated of a Gryffindor, after all. What's up, Sir Nicholas, I replied. It's excellent to be again. And this should be the circle of relatives I've been listening to approximately. Angelina Johnson tells me you re-engaged. Is this the strapping young lad, here? He questioned, indicating Edward, who looked slightly disturbed at being addressed as such by a lifeless man. Sure, I giggled. It's far a satisfaction to make your acquaintance, younger man, and the same goes for the rest of your own family. He bowed and lifted his partially severed head, tilting it to the facet in what became clearly intended as a well-mannered and inviting gesture. I studied the faces of the Cullens and quite saw Jasper supply a completely uncharacteristic gulp. His jaw changed into tight and his eyes have been rivaling golfing balls in size. I shook with laughter and did my very best to suppress the tears that were forming at the corners of my eyes. He threw me a glance that definitely stated carry on and I swear I will eat you. However, it handiest made things worse and that I had to press my face into Edward's shoulder to save you myself from bursting into hysterics and offending the Gryffindor ghost. He did have a tendency to be a little temperamental, after all. Edward straightened up and addressed the ghost. I imagine he concept that it turned into unacceptable for a vampire to illustrate soreness, even as surrounded by youngsters and adults alike who appeared to haven't any hassle with the idea of taking part in prolonged conversations with obvious individuals. Thank you, he replied courteously, although a bit stiffly. It smiles very nice to fulfill you, Sir Nicholas. My circle of relatives and I've every intention of doing our first rate to protect the college and its college students. Well stated, boy, well said. We will deliver the one's disgraceful excuses for wizards a fight to do not forget. Welcome to the fold. Nick floated off then inside the course of the Fats Friar, who become huddled among the Hufflepuffs. Edward's posture relaxed barely, before going inflexible once more within the next second. His fists clenched and he growled. It was really silent amongst the loud voices filling the hall, but it became terrifying all the identical. Edward, Jasper stated, more alert than ever as he tasted his brother's temper. He is right here, he tousled. I knew who he turned into referring to earlier than he said the name. I ended respiratory. Voldemort is here. He is out of doors with the Death Eaters. There are dozens of them, Bela. I cast my eyes up to his face, but couldn't convey myself to talk. His face, why does he look like that? Why is his face so snake-like? I inhaled deeply and closed my eyes, forcing myself to concentrate on Edward's query. I have no concept. I don't know what he gave the impression of before he tried to kill Harry. I anticipate that something occurred that night mangled his face beyond reputation. Both that, or the act of mutilating his soul time and again has had an instantaneous effect on his body. Edward stared at me silently as he taken into consideration my idea. It changed into so short that I used to be uncertain whether it had occurred in any respect, but I thought I noticed his eyes flash with pain, and that I prayed that he wasn't making use of my phrases to explain his very own physical transformation. Unexpectedly, the bustling noise echoing at some stage in the excellent hall diminished as Professor McGonagall walked to the front of the platform and referred to as for silence. I am positive the information has reached you all by means of now, she referred to as. Hogwarts is ready to undergo a siege in order to be led by means of he who ought to not be named. He and his supporters have already succeeded in infiltrating the ministry and, therefore, we cannot anticipate any call for resource to be replied by way of our leaders, she stated the time period paradoxically, as though locating it ridiculous, in our hour of best need. I and the opposite professors, together with the Order of the Phoenix, will remain behind to hold off the attack. You, then again, are to go to the room of requirement situated on the 7th floor hall, in which you will be led from the college. The evacuation will be overseen by means of Mr. Filch and Madame Pomfrey. Prefects, when I supply the word, you will organize your own home and take your expenses, in an orderly style, to the evacuation point. And what if we need to stay and fight? Shouted Ernie Macmillan from over at the Hufflepuff desk. Professor McGonagall continued her speech, informing everyone that the ones of age could be allowed to live behind. I caught sight of Harry heading alongside the tables as I listened, and checked out Edward questioningly. He's searching for Ron and Hermione, he defined. He does not realize they went to the Chamber of Secrets. Did they have got the basilisk fangs yet? I whispered. Sure. They have simplest just reduced them from the snake. Ron is telling Hermione she should do it. He destroyed the locket, and Harry destroyed the diary. The Horcrux is doing something. It's torturing her. Torturing. What do you? Now not physically, mentally. It is projecting pictures of Ron and Harry dead. It is speak me to her, telling her that if they stay and fight, her friends will die. It is telling her that. Edward sucked in a shallow breath and held it. I felt my pulse quicken and my respiration boost up. I gripped his hand as the adrenaline coursed through my body. Immediately, his face broke into a breathtaking smile. She's performed it, he whispered all of sudden. She's destroyed the goblet. That leaves simplest the diadem, if that honestly is the missing Horcrux, and the snake. Alice chipped in. I used to be approximately to grin with the knowledge that we have been one step toward ridding the sector of Voldemort for all time. However, my non-permanent happiness changed into eradicated as a high, cold voice drowned out that of my old Transfiguration professor. I understand you are preparing to fight. Screams of terror erupted for the duration of the terrific hall. Like the college students, among the Cullens commenced searching round for the source. He is nevertheless outdoor, Edward said. He is the use of the sonorous spell. I whispered, your efforts are futile. You can fight me. I do no longer need to kill you. I've incredible respect for the academics of Hogwarts. I do not want to spill magical blood. Every person sat in silence now, certainly petrified. Give me Harry Potter, the voice went on, and none will be harmed. Provide me Harry Potter, and that I shall go away the school untouched. Provide me Harry Potter, and you shall be rewarded. You have got until midnight. No longer one character spoke inside the issuing seconds. All attention was centered on Harry. I scanned my eyes over the faces of the scholars, and regardless of the worry that became nonetheless dominating their features, I glimpsed little indicators that instructed me they would no longer desert our pal. Some directed tiny smiles of encouragement and reassurance at him, others dispatched brief nods his way to carry they have been nevertheless his. Voldemort's words had carried out the alternative impact of that he had meant. In preference to crumbling our resistance, they simplest reinforced it, welding our allegiance and uniting us against our not unusual enemy. The first test of our reinforced loyalty got here whilst a voice from the Slytherin desk broke the silence. However, he is there, Pansy Parkinson screamed, raising a hand and pointing at Harry Potter's there. A person take hold of him. I felt rage flare interior me, clawing at my gut like a monster trying to break loose. Before I knew what I used to be doing, I was on my featuring with my wand stretched out in front of me, the top aimed at the woman stood going through the alternative 3 homes of Hogwarts. In my outer edge, I noticed that others had reacted inside the equal instant with the equal fluid movements. I stored my eyes fixed on Parkinson, noting the way in which her eyes popped as they traveled the period of the corridor. The Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs stood in the back of must have followed the instant set with the aid of the Gryffindors. Another time we had been united towards Slytherin. It jogged my memory of the times we had accomplished so whilst playing for the Quidditch Cup. I felt Edward's arm brush in opposition to mine as he stood up and leaned forwards, a low growl vibrating via his torso. The rest of the Cullens accompanied healthy. I smiled with pride as the eyes of the Slytherins zeroed in on my family. Pansy glanced at Edward and went inflexible, before instinctually taking a step lower back. Thank you. Omit Parkinson, Professor McGonagall said curtly. You'll depart the corridor first with Mr. Filch. If the relaxation of your home ought to comply with. The Slytherins eagerly made their manner from the corridor, the underaged Ravenclaws, Hufflepuffs, and Gryffindors following intently behind them. I backed to my seat, as did the rest of people who have been staying behind, to look forward to in-addition coaching. Edward sat down beside me, and I turned my face to his, confused at first at the expressions he and his own family held as they appeared me. I paid the closest interest to Edward's, realizing that it turned into overflowing with each sheer awe and absolute satisfaction. Bela, he murmured in an astounded voice, that became high quality. The manner you reacted, it become. I reacted no in a different way to all of us else, I shrugged. That failed to make it any less outstanding, added Jasper. Pretty the opposite, definitely. The emotion that swept the room in that first 2D became incredible. It nearly knocked me off my seat. I've in no way felt would ever adore it. The sight by myself was inspiring. Carlyle stated. I've in no way seen such a breathtaking show of harmony. You're certainly complete of surprises nowadays, Bela. I beamed at him. You've got seen not anything but. Their eyebrows shot up again and every of them grinned, before Emmett broke the silence with a powerful laugh. I guess there was more than one which means behind your Patronus, in spite of everything, he boomed. And to assume all of us idea you a lamb. As our quiet laughter ended, I stuck sight of Harry. The Cullens observed my gaze and stared at him. He met them with a grateful smile, and that I guessed that he become remembering how a group of strangers had proved their willingness to shield him. He motioned along with his head for us to transport down the table. I smiled luckily and led the Cullens towards the remaining Gryffindors, all of whom obtained us with pleasant faces. Kingsley then took the platform and started handing out posts. It turned into decided that a group of college students might accompany Flitwick, Sprout and McGonagall, each of whom could take one of the 3 maximum towers: the Ravenclaw Tower, the Astronomy Tower, and the Gryffindor Tower where they would be the most probably to hit the enemy objectives trying to penetrate the school. Lupin, Mr. Weasley and Kingsley would take a group of college students into the grounds to duel the loss of life eaters and creatures lurking there. Kingsley then grew to become his interest to choosing a person who may want to organize the defense of the entrances into the college, for which Fred and George volunteered. They, together with the other leaders, took to the platform and started dividing us all into organizations. Bela, Fred known as, we'll take you and the Cullens. If Harry is going to be searching the fortress for something, we need sturdy and capable opponents to protect it until he is determined, well whatever it is he's looking for. Is that okay with you? He finished, glancing around at my family. All of us nodded our approval. While each of the leaders had assembled their teams, they led us out of the first-rate hall. Timber, Angelina, Katie, and Lee, you are on Group Vampire and are to cowl the entrance to the clock tower, stated George, searching at his vintage Quidditch partners before addressing all of us. The tower is a chunk uncovered so that you'll need to unfold out. We're going to need some of you to protect the entrance in the courtyard, after which there'll want to be at the least of you protecting the separate floors. If old Voldy has taught his pets his capabilities, they is probably capable of fly up the ranges when they've penetrated McGonagall and Flitwick's defenses. When the twins had completed dividing us and assigning us our positions, they gave us their departing, morale-boosting speech. Proper good fortune, wizards, witches, and vampires, said George. We know you may do us proud and defend the school to the excellent of your ability, endured Fred. It has been an honor to proportion our troublemaking teenage years here with you at Hogwarts. And it's Miles' honor to face with you in opposition to you realize who this night. Now, Gryffindors, Hufflepuffs, Ravenclaws, and buddies of Hogwarts, take your positions. George and Fred raised their wands within the air, shouting in unison, and provide them hell. The crowd cheered and stomped their fort, wands raised in a final show of allegiance, before we all went our separate approaches in the route of our posts. My friends and that I led the Cullens up a flight of stairs and through a fixed of corridors. While we reached our vacation spot, the vampires gasped aloud as they took inside the site. Our function halfway up the tower would generally have supplied me with a brilliant view of the stone courtyard leading out onto the protected bridge, beyond which turned into Hagrid's hut and the sinister forbidden woodland. It became too darkish for me to peer, but I knew the constrained mild would now not avert the proper vision of the Cullens. Lumos Maxima, I exclaimed, casting a ball of awesome white light into the air outside to light up the encircling area. We each took our places then. Timber went to defend the doorway on the ground level with Emmett and Jasper Carlyle. Rosalie and Angelina took the primary ground. I took the next with Edward and Esme, and the pinnacle floor was blanketed by Alice, Katie and Lee. There were 5 minutes left until middle of the night, so all that turned into left to do changed into wait. I regarded over at Edward and Esme, both of them wearing expressions of excessive awareness. My family had most effective been at Hogwarts for an hour. In that time by myself they had been proven more kindness and attractiveness than they ever had within the Muggle International. As I seemed out onto the grounds and awaited the approaching tempest, I knew they could do the whole lot of their strength to shield the school and those who known as it domestic. They had in the end skilled what it felt want to be simply liberated, and I realized then that, tonight, possibly it wasn't simply wizards and witches who would be battling for the continuance of freedom. My coronary heart became pounding with the pressure of a hammer as the first bell announced the countdown to middle of the night. Inside the very subsequent moment, Edward stiffened and gave my hand a firm squeeze. Get geared up, he murmured throatily. They re-coming. I solid my eyes to the away's end of the stone courtyard, and gripped my wand tightly as I considered a ramification of viable spells in my head. The second the last bell sounded, a streak of red mild flashed from the covered bridge and via the stone courtyard, heading instantly for wood. It turned into properly aimed and would have hit its target, however Emmett jumped to the side to defend him from assault, the mild hitting him square within the chest and reflecting off his skin in another way than daylight. The exquisite glow of the orb, which changed into nevertheless floating above the courtyard, revealed 12 shadowy figures as they ran into view, each taking cover in the back of the stone pillars lining the location. I fired a beautiful spell at one earlier than he may want to make the dive. It caught him on the shoulder and propelled him through the air, his head cracking into stone, earlier than he crumpled towards the ground. My assault right now provoked a reaction from the surrounding demise eaters, and as a minimum 6 curses flew my manner. earlier than they could hit me, something crashed into my side and pressured me to the floor. I heard a valid like that of an explosion, which was really a result of the cursive smashing against the inner partitions of the clock tower. A weight above me pinned me to the ground, forcing my face to press in opposition to the timber boards. Then the pressure lifted barely, permitting me to rotate my frame so that I may want to look up into the eyes of my protector. Edward turned into soaring over me, his arms on both aspects of my head, the relaxation of his length protecting mine. I did not comprehend what he become doing at the start, but then it hit me abruptly as I saw portions of sandstone, some the dimensions of small boulders, colliding along with his rock-tough lower back and limbs. I knew it wasn't hurting him, but that didn't save you his jaw from clenching in fury, or forestall his stunning golden eyes from turning furious. He certainly did appear like a bloodthirsty vampire now. He pulled me up as the closing block of rubble hit the ground, and right now flew from my aspect in a motion too short to look, scooping up the largest piece of particles in every of his muscular, marble arms, earlier than swinging his frame forwards and catapulting the boulder at a figure in the far right nook of the courtyard. The Demise Eater had simply stepped out from behind his protective pillar to throw some other curse at timber, and did not have time to move out of the course of Edward's rushing missile. It smashed into his frame with deadly force, thrusting him backwards and crushing him towards a wall. I failed to want the mild bathing the courtyard to realize that his blood became now spilling freely against the cobbles below. All of a sudden, a jet of inexperienced mild become hurtling at me from my left. The simultaneous attacks of the 6 Demise Eaters from handiest moments in the past have been powerful sufficient to shatter a hollow inside the magical defenses, leaving me exposed to further oncoming curses. I reacted instantly and screamed, Protega Horribilis. The flare rebounded off the Protect at a perpendicular angle, causing it to streak upwards into the starry sky. Curses and jinxes have been flying everywhere now, colliding against citadel walls and stony pillars, giving the impact that an isolated hurricane had descended upon the courtyard, filling it with inexperienced and scarlet lightning, and resounding thunder. Esme become following Edward's lead and hurling boulders at targets under. I didn't have time to check to make sure the others were okay, due to the fact the spells have been nevertheless firing at me. The time for shields and disarming charms changed into truly over now, and that I knew that the most effective way to guard my breakable human buddies could be to do as McGonagall had suggested, duel to kill. A streak of inexperienced light flashed through the air once more. It wasn't aimed at me this time, however, alternatively, flew at those on the level above. I had no concept whether or not it had hit its goal. I desperately prayed that it hadn't. The mere sight of it became sufficient, although it filled me with anger and hate, and that I aimed my wand on the pillar from behind which the curse had come. Confringo. The stone pillar exploded against the dying eater, whose screams had been cut off as he became blasted via the air and beaten underneath the rubble. Esme shielded me as extra curses had been solid in my course. The vampires and their impenetrable skin were surely giving us a bonus, and that I mentally thanked my lucky stars for sending me Edward and his own family. The following minutes created extra casualties for our enemy, though our corporation remained unharmed. A shriek from under knowledgeable me that became in hazard of converting. The sound become off, even though I could not inform why at the start. Then I realized that it had come from a male, but the pitch of it became better than something I had ever heard from the vampires, or even from Timber, for that remember. What the hell, Bela? I solid my eyes over the ridge and realized that it turned into Emmett, who had given the barely coherent scream. He changed into being attacked by way of an acromantula, as was Jasper. Timber had retreated to better floor. You never stated anything about massive spiders. He roared. You by no means requested. I screamed again at him. You are a vampire. I thought you have been imagined to be fearless. I am fearless, but a touch heads up might have been very, very excellent. I shot Hearth at the monsters in the direction of the returned. I did not need to hazard hitting the Cullen brothers protecting the foot of the clock tower, so I decided to attempt to hold off those that have been in addition away. Even though I hit one or two, and anxious a few others into chickening out, numerous of the spiders dodged my spell and superior on the citadel. Are you able to hold your very own for a minute or two whilst I am going help Jasper and Emmett? Edward requested, throwing some other boulder into the courtyard, this time aiming for the 8-legged creatures, rather than the final Demise Eaters. I have Esme to protect me if I need it, I replied, blasting a spell on the stone shape at the center of the backyard. A block of broken stone flew diagonally through the air, bludgeoning the head of considered one of our fuzzy pals. Pass, help your brothers. Edward jumped over the railings and dropped to the floor, without delay grabbing the legs of an acromantula and swinging it against the fort wall, the blow killing the creature right away. The boys have been doing a top-notch activity at the floor, for which I used to be thankful. I genuinely did not need to be eaten through in military of killer arachnids. One, however, should have managed to creep round while every of them have been occupied, for simply as I was approximately to hearth the jinx at one of the 3 closing loss of life eaters, a first-rate, bushy spider released itself over the railings, and flew in the direction of me, its pincers clicking madly in anticipation. Esme became quicker though, and inside the subsequent 2D that I saw her, she resembled nothing of the sort and mild mother discern I had come to recognize so nicely. Her teeth had been bared in a feral snarl as she jumped among us. It was so brief that I slightly stuck it, but her palms flew up and she or he plunged them into the beast's mouth, before pulling her hands in both root and ripping its head in two. Blood and brains spilled across the floor as she kicked the abdomen into the air like a soccer, sending it hovering upwards in an excessive arc. It disappeared from view as it traveled similarly into the distance. The snarl disappeared from Esme's face as she became to me. Her resulting smile changed into considered one of both comfort and sheepishness. My eyes had been practically popping out of my cranium as I checked out her. Sorry approximately that, darling, she stated, lovingly stroking my cheek. I hope I failed to scare you. I shook my head and tried to regain a less astounded-looking expression. Do not be sorry, I informed her. You simply saved my lifestyles. That became first-rate. I am just satisfied you are okay, dear. It'd be insufferable for our own family if anything have been to manifest to you. I smiled at her now in earnest, and embraced her in a hug. She lowered back it, wrapping her arms tightly round me. Oh, Bella, you are going to get spider brains all over your clothes. I appeared down at my shirt positive sufficient. Some of the mess had transferred from Esme's garb to my very own at some point of our hug. It's no big deal, I laughed, waving my wand and enjoying Esme's smile because the gunk disappeared from both our clothes. Bella, Edward shouted as he jumped through the opening and again onto our ground. We have to get to Harry, now. He is approximately to be attacked. There are Slytherins searching the citadel for him. They are heading in his direction. My coronary heart sank. Slytherins attempting to electrify the Darkish Lord would simply go to any period to achieve this. I ran to the foot of the stairs main as much as the subsequent degree, and screamed, Lee. As he came strolling down to meet me, I wasted no time, ordering him to take my place along Esme, at the same time as I ran up to Edward and allowed him to drag me onto his back. In which are you going? He cried. To help Harry, after which we have been off, speeding away closer to an unknown danger. I did not want to factor out the guidelines seemingly. Harry was heading for the room of requirement, and because of his awesome vampiric memory, Edward may want to consider the direction returned. He ran through the corridors at an insane velocity, for which I was thankful. From time to time, we would bypass college students firing spells at shadowy goals, maximum of whom had been dodging in the back of walls or shielded themselves from assault. Every time I caught sight of a loss of life eater, but I might throw stunners over my shoulder inside the wish that they might hit their mark. Most did, and the ones that didn't regularly contributed to the defeat of various enemies. They had been too overwhelmed at having to guard themselves towards the a couple of charms and jinxes rocketing their manner 3, 4, occasionally 5 at once and couldn't hold out against the students. We had been pretty much to exit out onto the grand staircase, whilst a giant fist smashed through the wall on the right-hand facet in advance of us. Giants, I squeaked, terrified, even though I was properly conscious that Edward ought to effortlessly maneuver his way around it within the blink of a watch. He failed to, although, alternatively, he stopped unexpectedly within the center of the corridor, the force of it thrusting me backwards and breaking my maintain from round his neck. I landed flat on my again, staring up at the ceiling. As I sat up, I peeked round confusedly and tried to discover the purpose in the back of Edward's surprising halt. My head grew to become to the right and my eyes caught sight of something as I looked through the arched window. For what could have been best mere moments, I gazed out onto the giant's dust-protected face. His mouth became pulled into a large lopsided grin, the arrogant smile of a bully as he is set to injure a small and helpless sufferer, revealing a row of crooked, yellow enamel. He raised his arm within the air and pulled lower back his meaty fist until it changed into level along with his ear. My breath caught and my belly clenched. I reacted reflexively and launched my body upwards, leaping out of the massive S direction, with no longer a second to spare, as he flung his fist another time through the defenseless rock. I landed on the front and right away rolled in order that my lower back become towards the floor, before aiming a jet of fire on the large S hand. He roared in suffering and stamped his big toes towards the ground, sending tremors via the earth and inflicting the castle to tremble slightly. At the start, I notioned my moves would initiate an enraged retaliation, however the sound of his wails diminished into the distance as the vast-sized man retreated from view. I concluded that he changed into probably avoiding in the path of the lake, or somewhere similar, in which he would be capable of discover something cool to soothe his burns. I stood up and grew to become to stand Edward. He hadn't moved a muscle, and if I hadn't recognized better, I might have guessed that the basilisk from the Chamber of Secrets and Techniques, buried deeply underneath the fortress, had escaped and become petrifying, all over again, the population of Hogwarts. "Edward?" I asked fearfully. In an exceptionally gradual and cautious motion, he spun his body till his eyes met mine. The expression he held turned into terrifying, even extra scary than the animalistic snarl he had worn again in the clock tower. His face became a mask of pure, absolute, melancholy. My first concept upon seeing it changed into that something horrible had passed off to Harry, Ron and Hermione, and then my mind flew to the Cullens. Had something passed off to considered one of them? And if so, what? After which, the melancholy was rolling over me too like an unstoppable wave, pushing me beneath and stealing my air. "Bela," Edward whispered, his eyes complete of worry and sadness. I experienced bloodless. I couldn't recognize what he turned into pronouncing. The words made no sense. He was a vampire. He in no way felt cold. His skin changed into so icy that the air circulating him continually felt heat, regardless of what the temperature. I waited for him to talk once more, for him to provide an explanation for what he intended, but before he even had the chance, a darkish hooded parent hurtled via the hole that had been left via the giant, and forced Edward's body returned in opposition to the other wall. It clicked. How ought I have been so stupid? All the clues had been there: the surprising melancholy, the reducing temperature, although, possibly, in Edward's case the wintry relax turned into without a doubt an internal sensation. I jumped to my featuring as some other Dementor flew into the hall, closely tailed by a third, both of which flew directly at Edward. He struggled towards them as they closed in and started out, sucking away his hope and happiness. I need to have realized that there were some darkish creatures that even vampires couldn't usually beat. Deflecting bodily assaults for them become easy, as I had witnessed within the previous minutes once I had watched them struggling with the hungry arachnids. Religious and emotional attacks were every other depend totally, in particular when you can offer a feast amassed through 100 years of pain, guilt, and loneliness. I pointed my wand on the Dementors and yelled, "Expecto Pat." Something hard cracked into the side of my head earlier than I should get the words out. I smacked against the wall, my wand dropping from my hand with the pressure of the collision. I became around to stand my attacker and felt a blow to my intestine, causing me to double over in ache. I used to be approximately to reach out for my handiest weapon, while I used to be yanked upwards through my outstretching arm. In the ensuing seconds, I felt the end of a wand press in opposition to the flesh of my throat and a massive hand ensnare my wrists. I pulled and squirmed to no avail. "I am going to make you watch, after which I am going to kill you," an unknown voice whispered easily in my ear. Tears have been spilling freely down my cheeks as I seemed on helplessly. The Dementors were nonetheless feeding, each of their faces getting in the direction of Edward's. He had stopped preventing absolutely now, certainly having given into the debilitating despair. I could apprehend it. I had given up too. Then, as one of the creatures commenced pulling returned its hood, I felt the closing tiny ember of resistance flicker someplace inside me. I remembered what was at stake. I remembered what I'd lose if I allowed this to continue. The arena should implode and send us all into a pit of fire and brimstone, and the whole lot might still be first class as long as Edward's soul became secure. Having his body harmed could be horrible enough, however his soul changed into the maximum valuable aspect inside the lifestyles, and it become approximately to be destroyed. That become unacceptable. I had no wand to assist me destroy Luce, so I did the best thing that I could. I jerked forwards, introduced my leg up, and thrust it again to hit the unknown man between the legs. He buckled immediately, liberating my wrists in the system. I dived for my wand, grasped it tightly, rolled my body over and screamed a spell that sent him soaring through the hole within the citadel wall to plummet to his demise. Then, I flashed my eyes inside the opposite direction toward Edward and remembered, towards all odds, that the lion fell in love with the lamb. My Patronus burst from my wand in an explosion of radiant light and flew forwards, expelling the darkness and chasing away the Dementors. I failed to apprehend what I used to be seeing in the beginning as I looked at Edward's slumped parent. His head became tilted upwards at an abnormal attitude and his eyes have been glassy and vacant. Above his open mouth hung a tiny ball of white light, which shone fiercely because it hovered in the air. And then it hit me with the force of a tidal wave. I used to be gazing Edward's soul, and it turned into by means of some distance the most beautiful element that I had ever seen. It did exist of direction, it did. He'd been wrong all along. Without caution, the orb descended slowly into Edward's mouth. Inside the subsequent 2D, he gasped loudly and inhaled a speedy and sudden breath. He stiffened, earlier than turning his head to examine me. Bela, you're bleeding. He changed into at my side without delay, checking the wound at my head. I knew he'd become in control of that aspect of himself now, however I didn't need to motive him more pain than essential. I pointed my wand on the spot wherein I felt the trickle of heat fluid, and murmured, a pisky. I feel, without a doubt awful, he admitted, his voice trembling in a way I had never heard it accomplish that earlier than. For the first time when you consider that I had met him, he appeared vulnerable. What came about? There may be no time to explain, I announced, remembering that we have been wanted urgently within the room of requirement. We must get to Harry. He could be in hazard. That was all that it took to go back Edward to his alert self. His body went rigid once more, and his eyes flashed wide. Then his face became triumph over by way of a surge of rage. He let loose an unmarried effective roar, earlier than pulling me onto his returned once more and shooting off toward the grand staircase. As we broke via the door and started out racing upwards, I feared for the person who had ignited Edward's fury. What's happening, Edward? Someone called Crab is attacking your friends, he growled. I didn't reply or demand further information. I didn't dare ask how serious it was. We passed many students on our way to the room of requirement. Some were carrying snargaluff pods and venomous tentacula, others were supporting their injured comrades, presumably searching for a safe place to take them. Just as we were nearing the top of the staircase, we saw Sir Cadogan screaming abuse at an oncoming Death Eater. You scallywag, you fiend, you cancerous vermin, I'll have you. The knight shouted at the enemy, who kept looking over his shoulder to ensure he was not being pursued. This, combined with the distraction of Sir Cadogan, meant that the robed man did not see us heading for him, nor did he hear our approach, for Edward moved soundlessly up the levels. The Death Eater, having had enough of the taunting voice, which followed him downwards as the knight maintained his chase, spun on his heels to face the source of his frustration, and blasted a spell at the frame the armored figure was currently occupying. Sir Cadogan let out a high yelp contrasting heavily to the usual pitch of his voice, and only just managed to hurl himself into the next frame in time before the spell hit the canvas and burst into flames. Why, you dog, come back and fight me like a man. Come back here and take me on, you yellow-bellied coward. Sir Cadogan drew his sword, but it was unnecessary. The Death Eater turned and ran. We were little more than 3 meters away when he noticed us. Due to our hurtling speed, however, our opponent did not have time to raise his wand and aim a curse. Edward soared upwards, barely breaking stride as he ducked for the man's legs and swung him over the railings head first. As we made the top of the stairs and entered into the corridor, I heard the echo of the Death Eater's screams, along with Sir Cadogan's cries of, "What chivalry! Many thanks, O valiant warrior!" Then, as we turned onto the corridor where the room of requirement was located, my heart dropped and I let out a strangled cry. The door to the room was open and oozing clouds of thick, inky smoke, whilst a burning light from inside cast a fiery glow against the opposing wall. "Edward, are they?" "No," he broke in. "They heading for the door. They on brooms and they almost out, and they have the diadem." My heart leapt back up. Ron and Hermione are in front. They going to make it, Bela. In the very next second a broom came shooting out of the room, impossibly carrying 3 individuals. Their speed was too great, though, and they couldn't brake in time. The broom smacked into the wall and the riders were thrown against it with a mighty thud, before each of them fell on the hard, cold stone beneath. It was Hermione, Ron, and Goyle. We stood, or, at least, Edward did, whilst I still hung tightly to his neck, squeezing desperately, waiting for Harry to fly through the door and crash as his friends had only moments ago. Then I heard a low frantic scream, which was rapidly increasing in volume, and all of a sudden, another broom was colliding with the wall, this one carrying Harry and Draco Malfoy. I let out a breath, which I hadn't realized I had been holding, sighing as I watched the door to the room disappear. I should have known, I stated, my eyes lingering on Malfoy as Edward let me down and we made our approach. "See Crabbe," choked Malfoy, as soon as he could speak. "See Crabbe. He's dead," said Ron harshly. I stopped abruptly. Crabbe was dead. Admittedly, I had never liked the boy. He was as much of a bully as the rest of the Slytherins, but I would never have wished death on him. Harry stood as the ghosts of the Headless Hunt sped past. His eyes trailed after them as they flew off down the corridor and rounded a corner, which was when he caught sight of Edward and I walking towards him and his group. "Bela, Harry," I said anxiously, "are you all right?" "I am fine. Have you seen Ginny?" "No. We were defending the clock tower when I looked at Edward, unsure exactly what to tell my friends. Nobody other than the 3 of them, or, at least, I presumed so, was supposed to know of the Horcruxes, and I wasn't sure that informing them of Edward's ability was such a good idea for some reason. Would they trust us enough with this to let us help? She was supposed to be here. She was supposed to be going back to the room of requirement. "Blimey, do you reckon it'll still work after that fire?" asked Ron, but he, too, got to his feet, rubbing his chest and began looking left and right. Then I noticed something hanging from Harry's arm. It took me a second to realize that it was an ancient, discolored tiara. My pulse quickened as I saw it and recalled Edward's statement. In my excitement, I ran closer to the trio and blurted out the words without thinking. "You got the Horcrux," I squealed, my smile dropping instantly as I took in their astonished expressions. I heard Edward suck in a sharp breath, and I froze. For a second, there was absolute silence, but it was broken by Hermione. "Bela, how do you know it's a Horcrux? How could you possibly know that?" she whispered. I glanced briefly at Edward and considered my reply. The only thing we could really tell them was the truth. There was no other explanation for how we could have acquired such information. I gave Edward an apologetic look before addressing the group. "We didn't find out until we got here. We were in the room of requirement and, well, Edward can read minds." Their eyes went wide, but then I saw the first indicators of doubt creep onto their faces. Furrows appeared between their eyes and they looked at each other uncertainly. "Evidently, we'd have to convince them. He told me that was what you were looking for, but none of us knew what a Horcrux was, so I asked the room to give me a book explaining what they were, and it gave me secrets of the darkest art." Hermione gasped, but Ron and Harry still looked unconvinced. "How do we know you not working for him? How do we know you not after the Horcrux so you can?" "Ron," I shouted offended, "are you actually mad? You've known me for 7 years. You know I'd never. You could have been imperious. He knows we destroying Horcruxes. He could have told you stuff and sent you to." "Ron," Edward said calmly, stepping forwards to look him in the eye, "if Bela had been placed under a spell to get the Horcrux, why would she have waited until now to come and get it? If Voldemort had sent her to retrieve the diadem, she would have known its location before entering the castle." "I think Edward's telling the truth, Ron," Hermione said. "What he's saying makes sense. Are you willing to risk it?" Ron asked, though I distinctly saw some flicker of belief flash through his eyes. "If I wanted to take the Horcrux from you, I could," Edward told him simply. "All we want to do is help you destroy it, and then you'll be free to go after the snake. Look, if you don't believe I can read minds, I'll prove it." "Ron, when you first went back into the room, you and Hermione kissed. And you were absolutely ecstatic, because you've wanted to do it ever since she punched Malfoy in your 3rd year." "All right, fine." And you love how cute she looks when she scrunches her nose when she's angry. Okay, and you think it's adorable how she bounces off to the library whenever she gets in. I believe you, okay. Now, will you please stop trying to convince me? Ron's ears had turned scarlet. Hermione was blushing profusely and was trying to suppress a grin, though she failed miserably. It wasn't Edward's normal practice to divulge other people's thoughts. He believed in allowing them as much privacy as he could offer, even though his talent made that difficult for him. I suspected that, on this occasion, Ron's embarrassment was exactly the emotion Edward had purposefully been playing on. Revealing so many personal details had obviously forced Ron into quick acceptance. He was probably scared of the lengths Edward would go to persuade him. Clearly, Edward sometimes played dirty, too. I smiled. Absolutely, said Edward, in answer to Ron's plea. Now, how are we going to destroy the diadem? Where did you put the basilisk fangs, Hermione? I took them into the room with me, she answered, clearly shocked at the extent of Edward's knowledge. I groaned. Well then, how are we going to get rid of the remaining Horcruxes now that we have no fangs to do it with? Now it was Hermione's turn to groan. Her head fell into her palms as she spoke, her voice low and muffled as a result. We should have left the diadem in the room. What good would that have done us? Said Harry, annoyed. We kinda need it to destroy it, Hermione. No, you don't get it, Harry, she went on. We should have let it drop into the flames. That was fiendfire back there, cursed fire. It's one of the substances that destroy Horcruxes, but I would never, ever have dared use it. It's so dangerous. Well, it's too late to do anything about it now, Ron sighed heavily. He punched a fist into his hand and growled. If only we had the bloody sword. Evil, little goblin. The sword of Gryffindor. Why would that work? If you can break Horcruxes apart through strength, why not let Edward? The sword of Gryffindor is tipped with basilisk venom, interrupted Hermione, which only has one cure. You need to damage the Horcrux so badly that it wouldn't be able to magically repair its. Wait, Phoenix tears are the only cure, right? I said, excitedly, my words blurring together as I considered my sudden idea. What about other types of venom? What about the types of venom that have no cure? My eyes flew to Edward and I saw understanding flash in his own. Vampire venom, he whispered. My venom. Of course, Hermione shouted, elated, running up to Harry and snatching the Horcrux from his grasp. Of course, I can believe I didn't remember. It never even occurred to me that you could help us. Are you kidding me? Ron asked. We went all the way down into the Chamber of Secrets when we could have just asked him to open up. Hermione ignored him and thrust the diadem into Edward's hands. She stepped back immediately and waited, elation coloring her features. What do I? Just bite it, said Harry. Edward looked at me, before inhaling deeply and snapping his eyes to the silver tiara in his hands. As he brought it up to his mouth and took another steadying breath, his golden eyes seemed to harden and fill with resolve. He gave one last glance in my direction, before plunging his sparkling white teeth into the center stone, wincing as a horrid and tarry substance squirting over his upper lip and into his mouth. His eyes squeezed shut and he clutched diadem tighter. His body trembled as he held the Horcrux to his mouth, ensuring that as much of his venom was injected as possible. Then, as he withdrew his teeth, he let out a cry of pain, the wail transforming into a vicious snarl of hate as he violently snapped the thing in half. He fell to the floor and I ran to his side, terrified that he had been hurt in some way by the fragment of Voldemort's evil soul. A distant and haunting wail seemed to echo through the corridor, and both of us shuddered visibly at the sound. Edward, I murmured, holding his face in my unsteady hands, are you all right? His eyes were pressed firmly shut, and remained so for the next few seconds as he sucked in deep, calming breaths. That was excruciating, he whispered finally, before twisting his head and spitting a mouthful of dark, bloody liquid onto the floor. When it touched my tongue, I saw things. I saw people dying, lots of people. I saw how he killed them, and felt the thrill it gave him each time he did it. And the blood it tasted, evil. I think that must have been because it wasn't actually blood you were tasting, Harry interjected. I agree, it wasn't blood, but his essence, said Hermione, who looked understandably disgusted by the idea of having to undergo such an experience. It doesn't surprise me in the slightest that you received that sensation upon biting the diadem. Voldemort is pure evil, his essence would reflect that. At least now we know the truth, Edward continued, turning his head so that he could look directly into my eyes, and vice versa. The pain I saw there was unmistakable. Venom destroys souls. That's right. Hermione beamed before I had the chance to respond, not understanding the meaning behind Edward's words. Now all we have to do is get to Nagini. With your help, Edward, we'll finally be able to end it. Edward smiled at her, but I clearly saw the anguish he concealed behind it. It hurt me to know that he was suffering, but there wasn't enough time to convince him of the truth. At present our first priority was the snake. The sooner we reached it, the sooner we'd be able to end the god-awful war. Until that time, the students and teachers of Hogwarts would continue to risk their lives, and some would inevitably lose them in the process. The sooner we killed Nagini, the less grief we would all have to suffer when the war finally came to an end. Edward stood and pulled me carefully up by my arms, and we immediately took off back down the corridor with Harry, Ron and Hermione at our sides. I promised myself, though, as we traveled towards our target, away from the two Slytherins, both of who remained slumped against the castle wall, that as soon as the last piece of Voldemort's soul was destroyed, the one that resided within him, I would show Edward that he was nothing like the monster that had willingly mangled his most precious possession. Sounds of shouting and explosions reached my ears as we rounded the next corner. There, backing into view, flares of red light bursting from the tips of their wands, were Fred and Percy Weasley. Both were battling masked and hooded men, and were shielding themselves against the many oncoming killing curses. We all picked up our pace at the sight. Edward could have been at their sides in a flash, but he was more concerned with staying alongside me in case I was in need of a shield. We reached the Weasley brothers, and I was about to assist them in their fight, but before I could, Jasper and Alice came hurtling around the corner at the far end of the corridor. Edward and I immediately flew to them, our concern welling for the other members of the family. We had to fall back. Jasper shouted, running towards us. The Death Eaters brought in reinforcements not long after you left. There were too many spells hitting the beams supporting the upper levels. They were going to collapse, so we retreated into the corridor. It's narrower and easier to defend. There's still a vampire to every human, so we came to help you, Alice explained. I looked over my shoulder towards the others. They were still dueling. A hood on one of the robed men had come down, and he had fallen to the ground, spikes having erupted all over his body after Percy hit him with a jinx. I spun back to face Alice. Well, we could definitely use. Suddenly, the air exploded somewhere behind me, sending a ripple of heat bursting through the corridor, which was now trembling madly, and I stumbled forwards as a result. The force of the blast must have propelled large slabs of rock in all directions, for Edward was instantly behind me, his body curved around mine, shielding me against the danger as he had done earlier. Smaller fragments were flying everywhere, some were hitting the wall nearby and bouncing off at considerable speed. I felt a sharp pain as one of the ricochets clipped me on the temple. Edward didn't let go, though, even as the blood began trickling down the side of my face. I remembered Jasper and my head flew up in search of him. He had fled to the far end of the corridor and had his back to us. He was clutching the stone wall tightly, his fingers digging into the rock as he fought the bloodlust. Alice had her arms around his waist and was whispering something in his ear. Then Edward's arms tightened around me, before inevitably releasing me as the missiles stopped firing our way. I staggered to my feet and pivoted on my heels, allowing the extent of the destruction to finally meet my eyes. The corridor had transformed into wreckage. The floor was loaded with debris, and the ceiling no longer looked stable, for it was crumbling in places. A little further up from us, sections of wall had been completely destroyed, the blast having reduced them to the rubble, which now stood littering the floor and burying the students. And, then, the world gave into screams of pain and echoing wails of horror and disbelief. It wasn't until I reached the injured and began helping them to worm out from beneath the blanketing stone and wood that I realized that some of the cries had been my own. I saw Harry and Hermione stumbling together over the wreckage, and that was when we all heard it. No, no, no. Someone was shouting. No, Fred, no. Our heads whipped towards the deafening sobs, and there was Percy Weasley, collapsed on floor and shaking his brother, Ron kneeling beside them, as Fred's eyes stared without seeing, the ghost of his last laugh still etched upon his face. I looked on from the side, not fully understanding what was happening, expecting my old Quidditch buddy to suddenly start blinking rapidly upon his return to consciousness, after which he would chuckle and direct some witty comment at his hovering brothers. That's what was going to happen any second now. Fred was going to come around and be Fred. "Edward," I said, my voice thick from my battle against reality and the growing lump at the back of my throat. "Why isn't he waking up? When is he going to wake up?" Tears were threatening to overflow as they rose against my damning eyelids. "Bela, Edward whispered, unable to finish. I shook my head furiously, refusing to accept his implication. "He's gone," he said finally. And I knew, then, that any chance of denial had suddenly been ripped away from me. Edward was gifted with the ability of hearing life if he was confirming it. Then there was no denying that the mind and heart of Fred Weasley were deadly still, and would never again explode into life. I felt myself falling, but couldn't stop it. I felt the grief flooding through me, but couldn't dispel it. I collapsed front first into icy arms, and then my body was being rotated so that, abruptly, the ceiling was in my line of sight as Edward cradled my limp frame. Then he cursed, whipped my body up from the ground, and rocketed along the devastated corridor. My eyes stared upwards blindly, and I had absolutely no idea where I was as he turned this way and that, nor did I know where he was taking me. The only thing that I was aware of was that the halls were filled green, red and white lightning once again, and that people were screaming. "Bela," he cried frantically, sitting me down against a wall. "Bela, please, look at me." When I didn't respond, he took my face in his hands and forced our eyes to connect. I stared into his golden irises and saw that they were swimming with grief, worry, and pity. He began stroking my temples with his thumbs in his attempts to calm me. "Bela, I need you to be strong now. I need you to stay focused. We have to." But I didn't hear the rest of his words, because the weight of everything came crashing down on me, and the only sound filling my ears was that of my own violent screams. Fred's vacant face filled the space beneath my eyelids, the image provoking even louder cries of grief. I clutched at the torn fabric of Edward's shirt and pulled myself into him, but no matter how tightly I pressed my face into his chest, I still couldn't trap the stream of tears flowing down my cheeks. They continued to fall, and I continued to sob. "Edward," a firm voice said from behind him, "let me." Edward held me closely for a few seconds more, before he silently unclasped my fingers from his clothes and moved off to the side. As quickly as the spot in front of me became empty, it was filled again by a kneeling body, and I looked up to see another set of sparkling golden eyes framed by a head of thick and wavy golden hair bearing into mine. The end we will continue in next part.